little sister's been drawing progressively more and more violent pictures in her notebook. She's 5, and yesterday her kindergarten teacher had a meeting with our mom after school when we came to pick her up. I waited in the car with my sister while they spoke in the classroom. I knew it was bad because windows to the kindergarten room faced the front courtyard parking lot. My mom and the teacher both glancing out the window at the Jeep that we're sitting in, their expressions dressed with looks of concern. When my mom returns to the car, she's carrying a handful of papers that my sister Jaden's covered in some pretty horrific imagery using her crayons. Pictures of houses with people burning inside, families hanging in trees, and this tall, dark scribble with red eyes floating above a bed while a girl is crying in it. I flipped through the pages again. I noticed the black scribble was hidden everywhere in each of the drawings that Jaden had made. Sitting in the kitchen of the firehouse, I originally didn't notice it until I saw the red eyes, which I'd thought was smoke originally. The next picture, it's crouched in the branches above the hanging family. I turned to ask what these scary drawings were about, but my mom stopped me, advising to wait until we got home. The rest of the trip home, Jaden danced to Kids Bop, and I couldn't help but stare at the art that she'd created. Crayon marks with raised edges of crushed wax, a result of how hard she was pressing while drawing these vile depictions. When the Jeep pulls to a stop in our driveway, Jaden jumps out and runs inside the house, giving my mom a chance to briefly tell me what the kindergarten teacher had told her. At recess, earlier that day, Jaden fell to the ground and started convulsing. When the patrol staff saw her, they ran over, and Jaden instantly got back up to her feet, saying, "Gotcha," then laughing and running off. It really scared the elderly woman who first saw Jaden bouncing and squirming on the ground. I asked my mom if she saw that Jaden had drawn a red-eyed black scribble person in every picture. She said yes, her teacher did too. Although this doesn't need mentioning from an emotional perspective because we love Jaden like she is our real family, but she is in fact my stepfather Jeff's daughter from a previous marriage. My mom and Jeff got married when she was in her terrible 2s. Jaden was actually relatively decent as a toddler, though. She always used to be a good kid, and that's why this recent spike in behavior has been quite unsettling to the rest of the family. That weekend, Jeff managed to get Jaden a Zoom appointment with a therapist. After Jaden got off the call, the therapist stayed on a little longer with Jeff and my mom. I sit off screen and I listen as they discuss the conversation. The therapist tells them Jaden mentioned the red-eyed entity during their time together. Jaden's named it Mr. Red. She says it shows her how she died in past lives. Her pictures are from the images that are shown in her head. Jaden explained it as a movie behind her eyes. The therapist asked if Jeff or my mom know where she could be getting these inspirations from. They both shake their heads. Jeff and my mom are two of the most laid-back individuals you'd ever meet. Our house isn't filled with chaos and no routines have drastically changed. The therapist concludes by scheduling another follow-up later the next week and asks us to continue observing her behavior, writing down anything out of the ordinary. Later that night, after dinner, while Jeff and my mom are outside smoking cigarettes, I go into Jaden's room and I ask about Mr. Red. I'm not one to beat around the bush. The fastest way to find something out is simply by asking. So I asked, "Who's Mr. Red?" As if common knowledge, Jaden tells me Mr. Red's an angel and that they had met in her before life. She says Mr. Red brought her to her now mom, Latrish. Jaden was familiar with his presence. and spoke of Mr. Red like referencing a friend from school who'd been absent. She then says she hadn't seen Mr. Red since being Jaden. I ask how recent was his last visit. She says at school today. Jaden says that she thinks she fell because Mr. Red was picking her up off the ground, telling her to go have fun. She doesn't remember telling the recess teacher, "Gotcha." Trying not to scare her, I act casual while she tells me all of this, which I then relay to Jeff and my mom the moment I exit Jaden's room. My mom wrote it all down for the therapist. Their appointment's scheduled for next Wednesday at 3. But I don't think my anxiety can wait that long for a theory as to what my sister's doing. Could this just be a wild attempt at getting attention? Are there any other questions I should be asking her? Parents or older siblings, is this just what kindergartners do? My father wasn't faithful. He was a man of faith, but hardly practiced what he preached. One night, he came home late from work, smelling like another poor sucker of a woman's perfume. Then, he had the nerve to lay his hands on my mom when she mentioned the pungent aroma that he'd brought in. He popped her in the eye, and it swelled up real fast. I ran at him, swinging with everything I had, trying to stop him from going after my mom, but he was a behemoth compared to my small stature at the time. Before I can get in striking distance, he turns and punches me in the stomach, instantly knocking the wind out of my entire body, crumbling me to the floor. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. My mom ran into the bedroom and got his hunting rifle from the closet. She didn't know a lot about guns, but knew enough to aim and shoot one. My mom also didn't have to worry about aiming it all that much, seeing as she fired from a near point-blank range, lining the barrel up right under the back snaps of his hat before pulling the trigger. Recoil kicked the rifle up and out of her hands, bouncing off the ceiling at the exact same time his hat did. We left his body in the living room until the next day. Early in the afternoon, my mom thinks, his work will be suspicious if he no-call no-shows. She calls his boss, fabricating a lie about a foodborne illness that her husband's come down with, explaining this is why he's been unaccounted for. His boss tells her that Jeremy, my dad, was let go back in August. They hang up, and I can't help but to question my mom about her poor choice in men. Jeremy was never a good father or husband, but for some reason, my mom had built a life and a family with this man over 10 years ago, before that night. Years of abuse, physical and mental, walking on eggshells every night, in fear something we'd do would set him off. We both felt a sense of morbid relief when the rifle's boom silenced his degrading tirade. My mom took the whole next day digging a hole in the outskirts of our property. It's where she buried my dad. I stayed at my grandma's house while she deep cleaned the living room and every item of clothing we wore that night. Jeremy's car was pushed deep into the lake off the interstate. My mom then walked the 12 miles back home in the dark. But even in death, his torment persisted. My mom would see his shadow standing in doorways or walking from room to room. I remember one morning when I walked into her room, she was sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the door. Quickly, she asked me if I was just in her room, but I wasn't. Before walking in, I'd been in my room, sleeping. Sometimes she would wake up screaming, even crying out, usually something like no or stop. Often loud enough to wake me up 2 doors down. I couldn't believe that it was possible to be tormented even after death. You think the worst is over, that the bad is gone, until it's sharing some sort of realm with you, still. From time to time, I'd catch him in the corner of my eye, always with more detail than I would like. I'd spot his red flannel standing out against the other more gray spatial colors. Of course, it was his red flannel, accompanied by a radiating dark feeling of dread, walking on eggshells, only I knew now that it was only a feeling. I hated it. I resented it. I resented the whole house, probably, my life in general, but I was too young to understand that. I would usually ignore him entirely. I wouldn't try to make eye contact or engage. I only talked to him once. I knew he'd been scaring my cat, Smithers. He liked to sleep between my mom's room and my room, which is why we keep the doors open. At night, my dad, he'd close the door, and he'd stand in my mom's doorway, a towering dark figure in the night. Smithers, horrified. For several days, I found him sleeping in the bathtub in the bathroom next to my room. So, I'd been really actually pissed off. Laying in bed, I shouted, not caring if my mom heard me or not. I yelled that I hated him, to leave me the fuck alone. I told him to stop scaring my cat, that he was a dead guy. He needed to move on. After that outburst, I felt pretty good. I was young, but proud of myself for swearing, for standing up to the guy, even if he was dead. From there on out, I spent my time avoiding his energy, focusing on mine. Whether I could or not, it doesn't really matter. I believed I could control my experiences. My mom, not so much. This happened for 2 months, until my mom couldn't take it anymore. She called the police to dig up the body. I then spent the rest of my adolescence up north with my aunt and uncle. I often wonder what happened to that property, and if his spirit, or whatever you call it, is still roaming. Of course, I can't personally bring myself to go back there. I mean, I escaped the guy twice now. I'm not gonna risk it.